In lesson 1, we looked at how we might ensure that our vCenter server upgrades will go nicely and keep our environment up and running nice and stably. In lesson number 2, we're going to have a look at vSphere Lifecycle Manager, which helps us to manage the lifecycle of ESXi hosts as well as your virtual machines in terms of VM hardware and VMware tools. Let's dive right in, looking at the features that we have with Lifecycle Manager and the 2 different ways that Lifecycle Manager has of maintaining your hosts and clusters. That is using baselines, which many of you may be familiar with because we've had baselines in Update Manager for many, many years, or using cluster level images, which is a new feature added here in vSphere 7. Okay? We'll also have a look at how we can change the patch download source. So Lifecycle Manager is a feature that is built into the vCenter server appliance. In previous versions back before 6.7, Update Manager, which is the former name of this feature, used to be included as a separate Windows system. But now, the whole system is built into our Linux-based vCenter appliance. And its job, like it says here, is to upgrade and patch hosts, help us to install third-party software and plugins and drivers on hosts, standardize our vSphere or ESXi image across entire clusters made from homogeneous sets of hosts, installing and updating ESXi drivers and firmware built from a small set of vendors right now, but that set of vendors that we're supporting is expanding. And then finally, managing VMware tools and VM hardware upgrades. What you're seeing here is, the pull-down menu in the vSphere client under Menu, and you'll see Lifecycle Manager down there at the bottom. And that's the link that we use to configure Update Manager, Lifecycle Manager, patches, and baselines, and all that kind of stuff. Okay? It's within the clusters or the hosts themselves that you actually apply those patches. So many of you may be familiar with the idea of baselines. And the new feature is managing your clusters and hosts by using images. And there's a bit of a difference between them. So let's go through them. And you have to decide whether or not you're using baselines to manage your ESXi hosts, or you're going to use images to manage your ESXi hosts. Like it says here, one method is supported at a time. And if you switch from baselines to images, you cannot switch back. OK, so let's have a look at this. Managing using baselines is what vCenter 7 supports for all ESXi versions 6.5 and later. Now you might say, well, what happens to the older versions of ESXi? Well, those are not actually supported anymore with vSphere 7. So 6.5, 6.7, and 7.0 are the currently supported versions under vCenter 7. Okay, so using baselines, you can support all the different versions. And what baselines do is this. It allows you to upload to Lifecycle Manager an ISO image. And you might download this ISO image from VMware or from any of your OEM ESXi host providers. And this will include the ESXi image. Okay? It will then allow you to also download patches from VMware, as well as from your third parties, patches for things like drivers and those kinds of things. And then as it updates vCenter's Lifecycle Manager database, it will compare your current ESXi installation against the ISO image and zip files and things like that you've uploaded, and then allow you to remediate your hosts. You remediate your hosts by sending them into maintenance mode, evacuating all of the VMs, and then hitting the update or upgrade button. Okay? ESXi upgrades are done through ISO images. Updates or patches are bundled into baselines that are dynamically updated by contacting VMware's patch repositories online. It's all done through the vSphere client. okay, and then comparing that against the current version of ESXi. Okay, so an ISO image or zip file is compared against a single ESXi host one at a time. All right, managing using baselines is new. It compares a host or a cluster of hosts against a customized image. And that customized image is something that we as vSphere administrators assemble through the vSphere client. We start with a base ESXi image that comes from VMware. And then we choose some add-ons, some drivers, some plugins, other components, firmware, and things like that to add to this custom image, to add to the ISO that comes from VMware, or the zip file actually in this case that comes from VMware, to create our own custom image for our cluster. Okay? And then we remediate the hosts against that image, ensuring all of the ESXi hosts match one another and that they all have the same set of software installed. Okay? Now, this managing using images only supports ESXi 7.0 and greater when that eventually arrives. Okay? Hosts are managed within a cluster collectively, one image created per cluster. And in order to use this, your hosts actually must be in a cluster. You cannot individually manage an ESXi host with images here. Okay? ESXi images are done through what we call image depots. Now, these are different than ISO images, okay? But they're actually obtained from the same download source at VMware. When you go to download ESXi, you get to choose, do I want the zip file or do I want the ISO image? And in this case, you'll choose the zip file. Updates or patches are bundled and distributed with new ESXi versions. So if we have a series of patches that are released by VMware, that series of patches will be included in a full new release of ESXi with all of the patches. You'll then import that zip file and it'll include everything. So you don't have to manage patches by updating individual zip files like you do on the baseline side of things. So here you see Lifecycle Manager's home view. And what this does here is starts from the main menu in vCenter, and there's a separate menu there for Lifecycle Manager, where you can then begin to build your baselines or your images. Okay? And you can see if you go to Image Depot here under Lifecycle Manager, you can see that there are 3 different types of components that you're going to add to your ESXi Image Depot. You'll have your ESXi version itself, any vendor add-ons, and then other components, okay, which are the base unit of patches and software that are included in ESXi. Okay? So go to the home menu and start off with Lifecycle Manager. It's a really great piece. Of course, you can go over to the settings and adjust the patch settings themselves. It's when are patches downloaded and from where am I going to download patches. Now, by default, all of the VMware sources are there, but many third-party vendors include their own patch repositories. So you can add third-party vendor patch repositories that you can check periodically as well. Now, Lifecycle Manager is actually tightly integrated with DRS, because when you want to patch or upgrade an ESXi host, that host first has to be placed in maintenance mode. And we know that hosts, when they go into maintenance mode, if they're in a fully automated DRS cluster, will automatically evacuate the hosts of the virtual machines and ensure that they're ready to be patched. So what Lifecycle Manager will do is it will look at the hosts to be patched, and one at a time, enter maintenance mode, evacuate the virtual machines, patch the host, reboot it if necessary, bring the host back online, exit maintenance mode, and then DRS will work to bring virtual machines back onto that host, rebalancing your cluster as the newly available resources then appear as the new ESXi host joins the cluster. Okay? If there are any configuration issues that might prevent a host from entering maintenance mode, it will now report that. For example, if you have an ISO image attached to a virtual machine that is locally stored, and vMotion for a VM can't occur. Lifecycle Manager will inform you, I'm sorry, we can't place this host in maintenance mode because we cannot evacuate the host. You need to deal with that first. That's a nice new feature included in Lifecycle Manager. So that's the basics of Lifecycle Manager. And what we've really looked at is the difference between managing with baselines for vSphere 6.5, 6.7, and 7.0 using ISO images, or doing a cluster-wide custom image by using Lifecycle Manager image depots for vSphere 7.0 features. Now, the next two lessons are going to describe exactly how baselines are set up and deployed against ESXi hosts, and then how image depots are set up and deployed against ESXi hosts. So we'll see you in just a couple of minutes.